Beloved, your soulmate's secret property just became yours. And the address is the part that will leave you speechless. Because this is not some random house they purchased years ago. It is not simply an investment. It is not a piece of land they forgot about. Your soulmate secretly chose this property because of you. Because of a conversation you may barely remember. Because of a place that meant something to both of you. And because, at one point, they genuinely imagined a future where you would eventually walk through that front door together. You were never supposed to discover it this way. In fact, for a very long time, almost nobody knew the property existed. Your soulmate kept it quiet. They did not show it off. They did not post photographs. They did not tell everyone they had made the purchase. Only a small number of people knew. And even those people did not fully understand why your soulmate was so protective of the address. But now something has happened. Documents have been changed. A decision has been made. And your name is connected to that property in a way nobody expected. Beloved, before I tell you the address, you need to understand why your soulmate bought the place in the first place. Because that is where the real story begins. There was a time when you and your soulmate spoke differently about the future. Perhaps nothing was official yet. Maybe you were still learning each other. Maybe the connection was already complicated. But there were moments when both of you stopped protecting yourselves and spoke honestly about the kind of life you wanted. Not necessarily with each other. Just life. You may have said something simple. Maybe you described the kind of home you would love one day. Not enormous. Not designed to impress people. A peaceful place. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere you could breathe. Perhaps you said you wanted a window facing trees. A garden. A porch. A room where morning light came in. Maybe you mentioned a certain neighborhood. A town. A street. A place you had visited once and never forgotten. At the time, you probably assumed the conversation meant nothing extraordinary. Your soulmate did not. They remembered it. More precisely than you realized. Months later, perhaps after the connection between you became uncertain, your soulmate found themselves near that area. Maybe accidentally. Maybe because they deliberately went looking. And something happened. They saw a property. At first, they kept moving. Then stopped. Because it looked strangely close to what you had once described. Not perfect. Perhaps older. Maybe needing work. But something about it felt familiar. Your soulmate stood outside and remembered your voice. The way you had spoken about wanting somewhere peaceful. The way your expression changed when you imagined a home that felt safe. And beloved, for reasons they could not fully explain, your soulmate contacted the seller. That was the beginning of the secret. They told themselves the property was simply a smart purchase. An investment. Something practical. Maybe they even used that explanation when someone close to them asked, "Why this place?" Your soulmate said, "It has potential." But that was not the whole truth. The truth was, you had described it before either of you knew it existed. That stayed with them. Your soulmate visited again. Walked through the rooms. And in every space, they imagined details they never admitted out loud. They imagined where you would sit. Which room you would like most. Where you would complain the light was too bright. Where you would place things. They imagined hearing your voice inside a house that was still empty. That frightened them. Because at the same time your soulmate was imagining a future with you, they were also struggling to admit how much the connection meant. That contradiction defined more of your story than you knew. Privately, they could imagine building a life with you. Publicly, they could barely explain what you were to each other. Beloved, that is how fear behaves. Sometimes the heart races years ahead while the mouth cannot manage one honest sentence. Your soulmate made an offer. And eventually, the property became theirs. But they did not tell you. That may be the part that hurts. Why would someone make such a meaningful decision and hide it from the person who inspired it? Because your soulmate was afraid of what telling you would mean. Imagine them saying, "I bought a place because it reminded me of the future you described." That is not casual. That is a declaration. Perhaps stronger than saying, "I miss you." It would reveal that while your soulmate was acting uncertain, some part of them had already placed you inside their future. They were not ready to admit that. So they kept the property secret. At first, perhaps they planned to surprise you. They imagined waiting until the right moment. Maybe after the connection became stable. After both of you finally spoke clearly. After fear stopped controlling everything. They imagined taking you somewhere without telling you why. Driving down a road. Turning onto a street. Stopping outside the house. You asking, "Why are we here?" And your soulmate handing you a key. Beloved, they imagined your face. That fantasy lived inside them. But the right moment never came. Instead, something between you became more complicated. Misunderstanding. Distance. Silence. Maybe other people became involved. Perhaps your soulmate hesitated too many times. Perhaps you finally grew tired. The future they imagined inside that property began moving farther away. And the house remained empty for a while. Or perhaps rented. Maintained. Improved slowly. But never emotionally empty for your soulmate. Every time they saw it, they remembered what it represented. A future they were brave enough to purchase property for, but not brave enough to openly choose. That irony began haunting them. Beloved, your soulmate may have had many things in their life that cost more money than that property. But nothing carried more emotional weight. Because it became physical evidence of a contradiction they could no longer deny. They had told themselves, "I wasn't ready." Yet they had secretly bought a place connected to you. They had told themselves, "I didn't know what I wanted." Yet they had imagined your life inside those walls. They had told themselves, maybe the connection wasn't meant to last. Yet they kept the property long after other things changed. Your soulmate eventually realized, perhaps I knew exactly what I wanted. I was just afraid of what wanting it required. That realization came much later. And by then, you may have already changed. Beloved, there is someone else who knows about the property. A person close to your soulmate. Perhaps a brother. A friend. A legal advisor. Someone who watched them make the purchase. This person asked years ago, "Why haven't you told them?" Your soulmate gave practical excuses. It isn't ready. The timing is wrong. I don't know where we stand. Maybe I'll tell them later. Later. That word again. Your soulmate built too many decisions around later. Later became months. Months became years. And eventually, the person asked something harder. If they never come back, what are you going to do with this place? Your soulmate did not answer. Because selling it felt like admitting the future was over. Keeping it meant carrying the possibility. So they kept it. Beloved, that property became a secret waiting room. Not because your soulmate expected you to literally wait, but because some part of them could not release the version of life represented by that address. Then something changed recently. Your soulmate received information about you. Perhaps they heard you were moving forward. Perhaps your life had changed. Maybe someone said you were considering relocating. Maybe you had become more serious about your future. Or perhaps the information was simpler, you had finally stopped talking about them. That hit your soulmate differently. They began looking at the property again. Not as a dream. As unfinished responsibility. They asked themselves, what happens to this place if I never tell them why it exists? Will I keep it forever as a monument to something I was too afraid to live? That question became uncomfortable. And beloved, somewhere around this time, your soulmate made an unexpected decision. They changed the ownership arrangement. Your name entered the documents. Perhaps through a transfer. A trust. An inheritance plan. A legal designation. The exact mechanism matters less than the emotional intention inside this story. Your soulmate wanted the property to reach you even if they never found the courage to personally hand you the key. That is why it just became yours. Not because they are trying to buy your love. Not because a house erases the past. But because your soulmate came to believe something. If the future I imagined cannot belong to both of us, the place should at least belong to the person who inspired it. Beloved, that decision was not easy. Someone close to them questioned it. Are you sure? Your soulmate said yes. The person asked, what if they think you're trying to manipulate them? That stopped your soulmate. Because they knew how it could look. After all the silence, suddenly a property? Money can create emotional pressure. A gift that large can feel less like generosity and more like obligation. Your soulmate did not want that. So they added conditions. Perhaps instructions. Something making it clear that accepting the property did not require accepting them. That matters. Your soulmate wanted you to know, this does not mean you owe me a conversation. You do not owe me forgiveness. You do not owe me a relationship. The property is not a trade. Beloved, if your soulmate has truly grown, that distinction is essential. A gift cannot be used as a key to somebody's boundaries. Your soulmate understands this now. But they also wanted the truth attached to the property. Why this house? Why this street? Why you? And that is where the address becomes shocking. Because the property is located near the exact place where your story began. Maybe not literally where you first met. Perhaps where you had your first honest conversation. Where your soulmate first realized you were different. Where you once said something about the future. Where an important memory exists. Imagine opening paperwork. Seeing the street. And recognizing it immediately. Your mind returning to a day years earlier. A road. A cafe. A park. A neighborhood. A place you thought only you remembered. Your soulmate remembered too. And beloved, there is something even more specific. The house number itself may carry meaning. Perhaps it matches a date. The day you met. A birthday. A number both of you once joked about. Something small enough that anyone else would miss it. But you would understand instantly. That is why the address leaves you speechless. Not because the neighborhood is expensive. Because the address itself proves how carefully your soulmate remembered. They did not select a random luxury property. They selected a location encoded with your shared history. Beloved, think about what that means emotionally. While you may have been wondering whether you were forgotten, your soulmate was maintaining a property connected to your memory. While you questioned whether your conversations mattered, something you casually described became architecture. While you assumed silence meant absence, a physical place remained in their life because of you. Again, this does not excuse the silence. In some ways, it makes the silence more tragic. Because your soulmate possessed evidence of love they refused to communicate. They could buy a house, but could not send the message. They could sign documents, but struggled to say, "I want you in my future." That contradiction became impossible for them to ignore. Perhaps that is the real reason the ownership changed. Your soulmate no longer wanted another hidden act of love. They wanted at least one thing to become visible. Even if visibility came too late. Beloved, there is a letter attached to this story. Not necessarily a dramatic love letter. More like an explanation. Your soulmate knew the property alone would create more questions than answers. So they wrote something. At first, the letter was practical. This property was purchased on this date. I have transferred, formal. Controlled. Then they stopped. Started again. Because legal language could explain ownership. It could not explain why. The second version begins differently. Perhaps, you once told me what home felt like to you. Beloved, imagine reading that. Then, I don't know if you remember the conversation. I do. Your soulmate describes the moment. Maybe a night, a drive, a random discussion. They repeat something you said, a phrase you had forgotten. And suddenly you realize, they were listening. Perhaps the letter continues, I saw this place months later and thought of you before I thought of the price. Then, I bought it because I imagined showing it to you one day. Beloved, that sentence would change your understanding. But the next one may hurt. I kept waiting for a version of myself brave enough to do that. There it is. The theme underneath so much of your connection. Waiting for courage. Your soulmate expected courage to arrive like a feeling. It rarely does. Courage is usually an action taken while fear remains. They know that now. The letter may say, I thought having the property meant I had already chosen something. But I understand now that I chose privately. And private choices do not create a life with another person. Beloved, that is accountability. Your soulmate could secretly imagine forever. You still experienced uncertainty. They could privately love. You still experienced distance. They could quietly preserve a future. You still had no place to stand inside it. The letter acknowledges that. Perhaps, I made you live from the information I gave you. And I gave you too little. That is one of the strongest truths your soulmate could admit. They may have assumed you knew. You did not. You knew only what they made visible. And beloved, the property is now becoming visible. But you must be careful. A secret property becoming yours is emotionally powerful. It can tempt you to rewrite the past. To think, they loved me this much, so maybe everything is forgiven. No. Love can be genuine and still badly expressed. A property does not undo years of uncertainty. Money cannot purchase trust. A deed cannot replace consistency. You can be moved by the gesture and still protect yourself. That is important. If your soulmate returns physically or emotionally alongside this transfer, watch how they behave. Do they expect gratitude to become access? Do they act as though giving you something valuable means you now owe them another chance? If yes, be cautious. But if they say, this belongs to you regardless of your answer, and then genuinely respect your freedom, that is different. Because perhaps the property was never intended to buy a future. Perhaps it is your soulmate finally releasing control over one. Beloved, there may also be another reason they transferred it. Your soulmate has been facing a major change. Perhaps health is not the issue, do not jump there. It could be relocation. A career move. Family change. A legal restructuring. Something forcing them to organize parts of their life they had neglected. During that process, the property came up. Someone asked, what do you want to do with this? Your soulmate had to decide. Sell? Keep? Transfer? For the first time, later was not available as an answer. And your name came out. They said, I want them to have it. Someone asked, why? Your soulmate responded, because it was always theirs in my head. Beloved. That is the sentence. It was always theirs in my head. Perhaps not legally. Not practically. But emotionally. From the first day they walked through those rooms, the property was connected to you. Your soulmate may have owned the deed. You owned the meaning. And now those two things have finally been brought together. But there is a more surprising layer. There is one room in the property your soulmate never changed. Maybe the rest was renovated, painted, updated. But one part remained close to how it looked when they bought it. Why? Because that room contained the clearest memory of you. Perhaps sunlight entered exactly the way you once described. Maybe it opened onto a garden, a balcony, a view. Your soulmate stood there during the first viewing and thought, this is the room they would love. So they left it. Someone asked why. Your soulmate said, I'll decide later. Again, later. Years later, the room remains. Waiting. Not for you necessarily. Waiting for a decision nobody made. Beloved, perhaps when you finally see the property, that room is the part that affects you most. Not the value. Not the square footage. Not the address. The evidence of somebody remembering details about your idea of peace. Maybe there is a window seat. A bookshelf. Something small your soulmate added because of a sentence you once said. That is intimacy expressed through objects. Beautiful. And sad. Because you were not there to receive it when it mattered most. Your soulmate knows that. Their letter does not pretend otherwise. Perhaps it says, I built parts of a future instead of building the communication required to reach it. Powerful. Because that is exactly what happened. They invested in a destination while neglecting the road. And no matter how beautiful the destination, two people cannot arrive there together if the path between them collapses. Beloved, your soulmate is finally learning the order. First honesty. Then trust. Then consistency. Then future. Not by the future secretly and hope love somehow catches up. Perhaps that is why the property became yours now. The gesture is less about beginning a relationship and more about ending a lie. The lie that you did not matter. The lie that they never imagined anything serious. The lie their behavior accidentally told you. Your soulmate wants one tangible thing to say, you were part of my future even when I was too afraid to admit it. Beloved, maybe that knowledge brings tears. Maybe anger. Perhaps both. You might think, why didn't you tell me then? That is the obvious question. Your soulmate has asked themselves the same thing. The answer is not flattering. Fear. Pride. Timing. Control. Maybe they thought surprising you later would be more romantic than risking a conversation now. Perhaps they liked the fantasy because fantasy could not reject them. Inside their imagination, you loved the house. You loved them. Everything worked. Reality could say no. So your soulmate kept the dream in a place reality could not touch. That is what secret futures sometimes are. Not proof of confidence. Protection from uncertainty. And now your soulmate has finally accepted, a future that exists only in imagination is not a relationship. They would rather let the property become real for you than keep using it as a private fantasy. That is growth. But beloved, what do you do? First, do not feel pressured. A valuable gift can create emotional confusion. Separate the property from the relationship. Ask practical questions. Is the transfer complete? Are there taxes? Maintenance? Legal obligations? Debt attached? Your soulmate's romantic intention does not remove real-world responsibilities. You deserve clarity there too. Emotion should not prevent discernment. Then ask yourself, what does the gesture mean to me? Not, what does my soulmate want it to mean? You. Maybe it gives closure. Maybe you do not want the property. That is allowed. Perhaps accepting something this emotionally loaded would keep you attached to a chapter you want to release. You can decline. Maybe you accept and create a new meaning for it. Also allowed. Perhaps one day the place becomes yours without remaining theirs. You fill the rooms with your life. Your choices. Your peace. Maybe someone else eventually joins you. That possibility may hurt your soulmate to imagine. But if they truly transferred it without conditions, they must accept your freedom. That is part of the gift. Beloved, perhaps they thought of that. Perhaps the letter says, if someone else eventually stands beside you there, I will have no right to be angry. Pause. I gave you the place, not a promise to me. That would be painful to write. But mature. Because true giving releases ownership. Your soulmate cannot transfer a property while secretly retaining ownership over your heart. And if they understand that, then perhaps their love has genuinely changed. Maybe, however, some part of you still wonders what could happen between you. The address stirs memories. You read the letter. You remember the old conversation. Suddenly the past feels alive. Be careful not to confuse revelation with repair. You have discovered what your soulmate felt. You have not yet discovered what they are capable of now. Those are different. Ask, can they communicate now? Can they show up? Can they handle difficult conversations? Can they respect your independence? Can they remain consistent without hiding behind dramatic gestures? Because, beloved, somebody capable of buying a property can still be emotionally unavailable. Material commitment is not automatically emotional commitment. You need both where appropriate. And perhaps your soulmate finally understands that. Maybe they do not ask you to meet them at the house. Maybe they leave the choice completely to you. But if you decide to go, imagine the moment. You drive toward the address. At first, it seems familiar. Then more familiar. A turn. A landmark. Something inside you begins recognizing where you are. You look at the paperwork again. then the street sign. And suddenly the memory arrives. Years ago, you and your soulmate were nearby. Perhaps sitting somewhere, talking. You pointed toward this area and said, "One day, I want somewhere like this." Your soulmate teased you. "Maybe, you've planned the whole thing already?" You laughed. "It doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to feel peaceful." Beloved, your soulmate remembered. That may be the shocking address. The property is not only in the city you mentioned. It is located minutes from the exact place where you described the life you wanted. Perhaps even on the street you once pointed toward. Your soulmate carried that detail for years. You arrive. Stand outside. And perhaps you understand something before opening the door. The house was never really the secret. The secret was how seriously your soulmate took a future you believed they were afraid to imagine. They imagined it. They just failed to communicate it. That is both beautiful and heartbreaking. You enter. Maybe the property is quiet. You walk through. Some areas unfamiliar. Then you reach that room. The one with the light. The view. Something there makes you stop. Perhaps on a shelf is an envelope. Maybe the legal representative placed it there at your soulmate's request. Your name. Inside, one final note. Not long. Your soulmate has spent enough years making things complicated. The note says, "I remembered." 2 words. Then, "You once told me you wanted a place where you could finally feel peaceful. I bought this believing one day I would be part of that peace." Pause. I understand now that I did not always give you peace. That line changes everything. Because the property symbolizes what your soulmate wanted to give. Their behavior sometimes gave the opposite. Uncertainty. Waiting. Confusion. Now they know. The note continues, "So I am not asking to be part of what happens here. This is yours. If we ever speak again, I want that conversation to begin with truth, not with what I gave you." Beloved, that is perhaps the strongest sign of maturity. The property is removed from negotiation. No, look what I did for you. No, now give me another chance. Simply truth. And then perhaps the final lines, "I thought love meant preparing a future for someone. I know now it also means being present while the future is being built. I failed at that. I hope I don't fail at it forever." Beloved, perhaps your soulmate is not asking you to return. Perhaps they are finally giving you something they should have given years ago, a choice without pressure. The secret property became yours. But the deeper inheritance is knowledge. You now know the connection was not as casual inside them as their fear made it appear. You know they imagined a home. Remembered your words. Preserved an address. Carried a future privately. But beloved, take the lesson carefully. Hidden love can be profound. It can also be lonely for the person who never sees it. Do not build your life around what somebody secretly feels. Build around what is communicated, demonstrated, repeated. Your soulmate may have loved you enough to buy property. You still deserved a person who could say, "I choose you." Those things should not be opposites. If another chapter begins, insist they finally become aligned. Let the person who imagined the home learn how to inhabit emotional honesty. Let the person who remembered the address remember to call. Let the person who could make a large gesture learn the beauty of small consistency. Showing up. Answering. Explaining. Listening. Staying when the conversation gets uncomfortable. That is how a house becomes a home. Not through ownership documents. Through presence. Perhaps your soulmate will eventually ask, "Did you see it?" You say, "Yes." "Do you understand why?" You answer, "I think so." Then maybe silence. Your soulmate wants to ask, "Do you hate me?" But perhaps they have learned not to make you manage their guilt. Instead, they say, "I should have told you." You respond, "Yes." Simple. No dramatic forgiveness. Truth. Your soulmate accepts it. Then, "I don't expect the property to change anything." You answer, "It changed what I understand." That may be enough. Because understanding the past and reopening the future are not the same thing. Maybe later. Maybe never. Your choice. Beloved, do not let anyone tell you that receiving this property means fate has already decided. Property is property. Love is choice. Every day. If you choose your soulmate again someday, choose because they have become emotionally present, not because the address proves they once dreamed about you. If you do not choose them, the dream was still real. Real things can end. Real feelings can fail to become healthy relationships. That does not make them fake. It makes them human. And perhaps your soulmate has finally understood what that secret address taught them. You can buy a place before you are ready to live the life. You can prepare rooms before you know how to communicate. You can preserve a dream while fear destroys the path toward it. But eventually, the truth catches up. Your soulmate's secret property just became yours because they no longer wanted to keep one of the biggest truths about their heart hidden. The address led back to you. Not metaphorically. Literally. To a place you mentioned. A memory you shared. A future you described casually enough to forget. Your soulmate never forgot. That is why the address leaves you speechless. But beloved, perhaps the most important thing is not where the property stands. It is where you stand now. You are no longer the person waiting outside somebody else's hidden future. You have the truth. You have the choice. And whether you ever invite your soulmate through that door is entirely yours. Because this time, they did not give you a house so you would come back. They gave you the house because they finally understood something they should have understood years ago: love does not make another person yours. It gives you the courage to tell them the truth, and then the humility to let them choose what happens next.